Hello everybody, my name is Enrin, and today we're going to be doing our first MTG Arena guide on Scute Swarms. There are two core game mechanics that this deck revolves around. One is Mutate, where you can pay the Mutate cost and then basically start stacking your creatures on top of one another, where every time that they mutate, they gain the abilities of every other card in the stack. And then Landfall, where if you play a land, then something happens. So those are the two things to really keep in mind here. To jump into the deck build, we have Gilded Goose. Gilded Goose is a really solid card for the beginning of the game. 1 mana, has flying, it can generate tokens, and you can create mana from using those tokens. This will help you get some of your 3 mana, even 4 mana cards out a little bit quicker at the beginning of the game. Mysterious Egg, kind of the same idea in a way, because you pay 1 mana, it's a great mutate target. It will gain a +1/+1 counter, which dropping a card turn 2 or turn 3 onto this, for instance, Sea-Dasher Octopus only costs 2 to mutate. If you dropped it onto the Mysterious Egg, now it's a 3/3 on turn 2. You can smack your opponent in the face and draw a card, which is great. So, more on that in a second, but we also have Glimmerbell here. Glimmerbell, not always added onto deck lists that you see for Scute Swarms, but it's been a card I've been trying, mainly because there's this really stupid combo that I managed to do once and then thought it was amazing, so I've just kind of tried it again and again, where if you have a Glimmerbell and then you stack a Parcelbeast on top, you can tap the Parcelbeast to reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it in play. If not, you can add it to your hand. But by paying 1 and tapping Parcelbeast, you can do that. And then if you have Glimmerbell, you can tap 2 and then untap it and then tap Parcelbeast again for the effect. So late in the game, if you don't have any other great moves to do, or you need to start adding cards to your hand because you've mutated yourself into oblivion, this is kind of a thing to do that you can try if you have a bunch of land on the field and nothing else to do with it. So Glimmerbell, kind of a cool card, and it has flying, so turn 2 drop Glimmerbell, turn 3 potentially drop Migratory Greathorn or something, and now it has flying. So that's great to have. Winged Words. I've noticed that this deck always is a little bit slow to get started, and once you mutate yourself into Oblivion, then you'll want to start regenerating your hand a little bit if it's kind of in the middle of the game and things aren't going super great for you. So I've been trying it. We have a bunch of flyers back here, 4 Gilded Goose, 2 Glimmerbells, so that's like around 10% of the whole deck are flyers. So, worth it to give Winged Words a try. I've had it on and off in the deck in the past. Going to see. Don't have to add it. There are a few other cards that you can try out as well. There's a Stampede card that lets you check the top 5 cards of your deck and then choose any creatures from it and add it to your hand. Had that in there for a while, just testing Winged Words now instead. Sea-Dasher Octopus, like I mentioned, only costs 2 mana to play, mutate, and whenever it deals damage to the opponent, then you draw a card. So play Mysterious Egg, Sea-Dasher Octopus potentially, or Gilded Goose, Sea-Dasher Octopus, smack your opponent in the face for 2 damage, draw a card, start generating that card advantage. If the opponent can't respond and the Sea-Dasher Octopus now has flying, you can probably get maybe 2 or 3 cards out of it before your opponent either burns it or kills it with a black removal card or something like that. So something to keep in mind there. Roiling Regrowth. Some deck lists for Scute Swarms don't have it at all. Some have it at 4. I just run 1 to add a little consistency with land ramp in here. Sacrifice the land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Great for Scute Swarm, which is next, where its effect basically creates this insect token every time a new land enters the field. Once you reach 6 lands, though, then Scute Swarm can start going crazy. So play Scute Swarm. I would sometimes say turn 3 if you think that you can keep adding lands, or hold on to it until you can play Scute Swarm and then play another land which can create a copy of Scute Swarm, because when you've reached 5 lands and you play a 6th, then Scute Swarm creates a copy of itself. So if you play a Scute Swarm and then Migratory Greathorn, where when it mutates, anytime it mutates, you can add a basic land from your library onto the battlefield. So you could play Scute Swarm, play Migratory Greathorn, get a land, get a copy of Migratory Greathorn then, and from there on, both of those copies start making copies, and then those copies make copies until you're just exploding with Migratory Greathorns or any other card that you've mutated Scute Swarm with until that point. This way, you can potentially start making hundreds, or in the past, thousands of Scute Swarms. Unfortunately, as of December 7th, I want to say, Wizards of the Coast finally patched that, because if you see this article here, the scutes that people were making were affecting other games because of the server load that the token generation was creating. So now tokens on the field are restricted to about 250, and we'll have to just kind of deal with that. 250, more than enough to swing at your opponent for game, so totally fine there. So that's kind of Migratory Greathorn and Scute Swarm. Boneyard Lurker. Don't see this, personally. I haven't seen this a lot on deck lists for the Scute Swarms, but what it does is you pay 4, in this case 2 forests and 2 other types of mana, and then when it mutates, return target permanent from the graveyard to the hand. I've found it to be great. So late game, mid game, your opponent has used removal cards or burn cards on your mutated creatures, sent stacks and stacks of creatures to the graveyard. This is a way to start kind of getting them back. If you get Boneyard Lurker and then a few other Boneyard Lurkers as well, I'm running 2, so you can start getting each other back and then start getting other cards from the graveyard back. I like to, if I can, stack 2 of these on top of each other with mutate, so that every time they mutate, they start giving you 2 cards from the graveyard back. And that's kind of a theme that we can look at for any of the mutate cards, and that's something to keep in mind if you're not super familiar with how it works, is that every time you mutate again, it triggers everything below it. So if you had, for instance, turn 1 Mysterious Egg, and then a turn or 2 later, depending on what you have, Migratory Greathorn on top of it, and then Boneyard Lurker on top of that. Now you're triggering Boneyard Lurker's effect, as well as Migratory Greathorns and Mysterious Egg's effect. So these things can just keep stacking and stacking and stacking throughout the game if they're not removed, and you have to play them again. Parcelbeast. This is kind of like your generation card. So you pay 1, tap, like I mentioned with the Glimmerbell. It can reveal a card from the top of your library. If it's a land, it can go into the battlefield. If not, it can go into your hand. This is great to play on turn 2 if you can. So play Gilded Goose or Mysterious Egg first, then turn 2, drop another mana, play Parcelbeast, and then now you have a 2/4 to block with, and potentially on either that turn, if you've managed to potentially use Gilded Goose or some other way to have an extra mana onto the field, then you can tap it for its effect. Otherwise, on turn 3, you can look to tap it to start getting ahead in terms of land on the field. A lot of times you'll have something like an Auspicious Starrix or Pouncing Shoreshark in your hand, and you'll want to get that onto the field as soon as possible. And usually early in the game, you don't have too much pressure from your opponent yet in terms of attackers, so that's a good time to start using Parcelbeast's effect to get lands or cards into your hand. Pouncing Shoreshark will save you on multiple occasions, many, many, many occasions actually. So Pouncing Shoreshark, when it mutates, it can return a creature your opponent controls to their hand, and every time it mutates, like I mentioned before, it'll do that. So if you can get Pouncing Shoreshark onto something, and then potentially a second Pouncing Shoreshark onto it, then if you can get some low-cost mutations going, like Parcelbeast or Sea-Dasher Octopus as well, then you can start bouncing 1, 2, or more of your opponent's creatures one after another using that effect. So that's great for survivability, because like I mentioned before, survivability, especially early in the game before you can get your ramp going, is kind of an issue. And if too much of your stuff gets removed too early, then the deck kind of collapses a little bit under its own weight, just because some of the better cards in here are either using mana that we don't actually run in the deck as their primary source. So for instance, Boneyard Lurker needs a swamp to be played by its normal cost, which we don't run. And also Illuna, Apex of Wishes, needs a mountain, which we don't run. we only run the forests and the islands mainly. So that's just something to keep in mind. Being able to send your opponent's cards back to the hand, as well as stall them or block them out in other ways while you're ramping, is going to be important to do. Then comes Auspicious Starrix, probably, and I can't stress this enough. This is probably the second most important card in the deck. Scute Swarm, obviously, very, very important. I would potentially say that Auspicious Starrix is even more important than that. Its effect basically goes that when it mutates, it pulls cards from the top of the deck, depending on how many times that card has already been mutated. So in this case, if you've just played a Mysterious Egg, say everything in your field has been removed one way or the other and you have to start from scratch, but you have a ton of mana ready to go on the field. So you drop a Mysterious Egg, play Auspicious Starrix, it's going to play, and then it's going to pull one card from the top of the deck. Now, if you play another card like Parcelbeast, stack it under, then it will trigger the effect again, and then it will bring out 2 more cards from the top of your deck, be it land, be it creatures, basically anything except like a spell or a instant. Now, if you have Auspicious Starrix stacked on top of a Scute Swarm, when Auspicious Starrix's effect brings out cards from the field, it brings out land untapped, and it triggers Scute Swarm's effect, which makes a copy of Auspicious Starrix, which lets you just start flooding the field with Auspicious Starrixes, and usually you can start thinking about swinging for game at that point. But just depends. Sometimes your opponent has built up a really large field themselves when things get a little more complicated, but it just depends on the game, obviously. Another card similar to Auspicious Starrix in a way, Illuna, Apex of Wishes, except it's a little bit downgraded from that. Whenever the creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land permanent. So in this case, it would just be a creature card. And then put that card onto the battlefield or into your hand. So it won't bring out lands or anything like that, but still great. Still good to have another set of cards that does a similar thing to Auspicious Starrix, gets more stuff from your deck onto the field, and that's really what's going to help us ramp. Something to keep in mind, Illuna Apex of Wishes, is that you cannot really Scute Swarm clone him like you can with Auspicious Starrix. If you try, then when it generates the second one, it will say only can have one copy of this legendary creature out at a time. Which one do you want to keep? And then you'll have to click one and it'll disappear. So don't try to Scute Swarm with it, but definitely Scute Swarm with Auspicious Starrix and just flood the field with 6/6 creatures. Now for lands, include Fabled Passage. If you play this, when you have Scute on the field, it'll create a token or a copy, and then you can activate its effect on the same turn, and then bring out the other land, which will then also activate Scute Swarm's copy. So if you did have, for instance, Auspicious Starrix out, it can create a copy of Auspicious Starrix the first time it's played, tap the ability, create a second one. Now you have potentially 3 6/6 creatures in one turn, or 2 additional 6/6 creatures in one turn from that land alone. So I would have 4 of these in here. I only have spent the wild cards to get 1 so far, but that's just my problem. I should have 4. I would recommend trying to get 4. Here's just some double lands, and then here is the breakdown for the lands that I'm using at the moment. So this is kind of the deck. Basically, start small. Start with the 1/1 creatures with either flying or with the growth effects for mutate, and then just start stacking and building from there, and eventually start just creating a redonkulous amount of Auspicious Starrixes and Migratory Greathorns and Pouncing Sharks until you can just swing for game. Alright, so let's jump into some games. This will be the last that you hear from me in this episode. I'm pretty terrible at commenting while I'm playing MTG, so for now, no commentary, but you'll get to see some good examples of how to start small and ramp, like I mentioned with this deck. And if you like what you saw in this guide and you want to see more, feel free to drop a like or a subscribe below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.